Hello students, welcome to your channel Zevish English Classes. I hope you all are keeping well, and in today's video lecture I will be going ahead with the part 2 of the same story, that is the sound machine, line by line explanation. So today I will be resuming it from 108 page number, so please open your books and open this page 108 so that we can go ahead with the part 2 of this story. He stood up and removed the earphones. It was getting dark and he could see pricks of light shining in the windows of the houses all around him. Carefully, he picked up the black box from the table, carried it into the shed, and put it on the workbench. And then he went out, locked the door behind him, and walked up to the house. Okay, so he had already, he had been so much engaged and engrossed with that experiment part all day long that it was by that time getting dark. And dark, for the word dark you can also use another word, murk, 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 which means dark. So murk is darkness actually, and murky is dark. So it was getting murky, it was getting dark, but still, he had some light coming from the holes and the openings of those houses that were there in the surrounding area. So he just picked up his black box from the table with the help of those lights that were coming from different houses, and then he carried that black box to that shed again. That shed which was in the garden and where he had done all that part, all that preparation and all. So he went back to that shed, and in that shed, if you remember, there was a workbench. So he just put back that machine on that workbench in the shed, and then he came out of that shed and locked the door behind him, and then he went to his house. The next morning, Gloucester was up as soon as it was light. He dressed and went straight to the shed. He picked up the machine and carried it outside, clasping it to his chest with both hands, walking unsteadily under its weight. So as soon as he could see some light coming and he could realize that it had become morning, he couldn't just stop himself and prevent himself from waking up and start his experiment part. So he just woke up and he just dressed himself and went straight to the shed. He picked up his machine from there and he just took it outside, and the way he was holding that machine in his hand was really reflecting his attachment with the machine and his obsession with that machine. He was holding it with both his hands and very close to his chest. So he came outside with that machine, and the way he was walking was again a manifestation of the clumsiness, that the machine was quite heavy since he was not able to walk properly. जब उन्होंने उस मशीन को उठाया तो वो जैसे लग रहा था प्रॉपरली चल ही नहीं पा रहे हैं, और मशीन का वेट इतना ज़्यादा है जिसकी वजह से वो अनस्टेडली वॉक कर रहे हैं. सो ही वेंट पास द हाउस. वो घर से फिर निकले, उसके बाद फिर फ्रंट गेट से बाहर आए, फॉर्म वो मतलब वो पहुँचे रोड पे, फिर वो पार्क जा रहे हैं. So he has decided to head to the park so that he can perform the experiment on a tree in the park. So what happened that there he paused and looked around him. So he just paused for some time and looked around him, and he placed the machine. All right, so what happened over there, that first of all he has chosen this morning time, this quite early morning time, so that he can go unnoticed while doing his experiment part on anything that he would choose. But since he had already experienced some sort of a sound uh, testing his machine on the flowers and all, and therefore he has chosen nature itself, that is tree and plant, to conduct his experiment. So for that he has woken up quite early in the morning and he has decided to go to a park. So he has already headed towards a park, so that there he will find a tree and upon which he can execute that experiment. So he reaches there and he looked around. Well, okay, so he looked around so as to look for a tree, large tree, and then he also got a large tree, a beech tree, and there he reached and he just put back his machine on the ground very close to the trunk of the tree, and then quickly then he realized that he did not have any kind of a weapon or a tool with the help of which he could start his experiment part, and therefore he went back to his house immediately, and from there he got an axe which was lying in uh, in in a coal cellar. Okay, so cellar is such a room which is there in the which is an underground room, you can say, or which is under the ground. So there was a all right, and such rooms which are made underground, they are meant for storing coals and all. So there was a coal cellar, and from there he picked up that axe which he had caught, and then he brought it back to the park, to that tree where he was about to execute that experiment. He put the axe on the ground and beside that tree, and then he was all set to do that. Then he looked around him again. So he looked around him again, and then he was just, peering very nervously. That means he was looking very nervously. Nervously, that means, why was he nervous? He was nervous to perform that experiment. It was like this. Suppose you have made a lot of preparations for some kind of a project or for your test examination. So obviously, when it is your final day to perform, you feel nervous about it. In the same manner, here Klosner had already made a lot of endeavors, a lot of efforts on this machine, and today it was like a final day to see whether the machine was actually a successful, one or not. So what happened that he was nervous and he was looking around himself, and obviously, as we know that he is somebody who remains in glasses, or you can say who wears glasses, and therefore he was just looking outside with those or through those thick glasses that he wears in every direction, and he was just trying to find out whether there was anybody or not in that surrounding. And he really wanted to ensure the absence of people in that surrounding, just because the absence of people in the surrounding would rather make him feel more confident to execute that experiment, because he did not want to go noticed by people, and he just wanted to do this silently in the initial stage. Once it comes out to be his success, then he would love to share it with other people too. So there was no one about, and it was 6 in the morning, so you can understand that it was quite an early morning time. And he put the earphones on his head and switched on the machine, and he listened for a moment to the faint familiar humming sound. So as we know that it used to happen that as soon as you turn on the machine, then the very first thing that you get to hear is a very dim kind of a sound, which is like a humming sound, and which seems to be the sound of the machine itself. Then he picked up that axe and he took a stance with his legs. That means he just picked up his axe and he also got into the posture to get ready, to hit that tree or the trunk of the tree. So he was standing with his legs wide apart and swung the axe. That means he was swinging the axe and swinging the axe as hard as he could. All right, at the base of the tree trunk. That means he was just, uh, preparing himself to hit the tree. So the blade cut deep into the wood and stuck there. So, and this is what happened also, that the blade of that weapon was quite sharp, and it cut the tree very, very deep, and also it got stuck into it. So at the same instant, okay, and at the instant of impact, he heard a most extraordinary noise in the earphones. Now, this is something really important, that whatever his expectation or anticipation was, that had probably come out to be true, just because he was expecting to hear a very extraordinary, you can say, or a very terrible and unexpected noise. And that's what happened also, that he got to hear such a sound, and that too at the very instant when he hit that tree. So this was probably again a coincidence which was somehow strengthening his obsession. So it was a new noise, all right. But this time what he got to hear was not like the noise that he had heard a day before while conducting experiment on the flowers. So this was a completely new noise, unlike any he had heard before. So he hadn't heard before, such a noise. Okay, harsh, noteless, enormous. So this is something really important you need to underline, because these words are actually explaining to you, the sound, the kind of sound it was. So that means these words are describing to you the that sound which was heard by Klosner. So it was a harsh and noteless, enormous noise. Harsh, you understand. Noteless means it did not have any note or any kind of an emotion, and it was like a large sound and a growling sound. However, its pitch was low, but it was like a screaming sound, not quick and short like the noise of the roses. All right. However, if we compare it to the noise that the roses had made, then the noise made by the roses were like quick and short. However, this noise was kind of long lasting, and it wasn't as quick too, but drawn out like a sob. All right, so it was more like a sobbing, like somebody was weeping, lasting for fully a minute. And this weeping, as if lasted for a complete minute. And okay, and also the sound seemed to be fading. How? Because it was at its peak, the loudest, when the axe actually struck the tree. But then it began to fade and turned fainter, or you can say dim, more dim and more dim. So it became dimmer and dimmer with the passage of the time. But when the axe had struck the tree, at that instant the sound was at its peak. It was the loudest. Klosner stared in horror at the place where the blade of the axe had sunk into the wood flesh of the tree. Then gently, he took the axe handle, worked the blade loose, and threw the thing on the ground. With his fingers, he touched the gash that the axe had made in the wood, touching the edges of the gash, trying to press them together to close the wound. And he kept saying, "Tree, oh tree, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but it will heal. It will heal. It will heal fine." All right. So Klosner, was staring in horror. That means he kind of got scared. What he had done something wrong. He was feeling guilty, and he was also, upset to think that this blade had been, sunk into that wood flesh. Now, this is something very important for us to understand why the writer has used the term wood flesh. Now, wood, the trunk of the tree or the branch of the tree is just the wood. It is not a flesh part. But then this, in the perspective of the writer, or according to the writer, you can say, this must be the perspective of Klosner, that the trunk of the tree was not merely the wood part, but it was as sensitive as, the flesh on the body of a human being. And that was probably one reason that such a sound could be heard when the tree was struck like that. So he has used this word wood flesh, and he means to say, ki, see how painful it must have been for the tree, to get that axe into its wood flesh. And then gently he tried to take out that axe by, trying to take out that handle part of the axe first, and then he worked the blade loose. So this is how he just tried to make it loose, and then threw it on the ground there. With his fingers he touched the gash is the wound, the open wounds that the axe had made in that wood flesh of the tree. And then he was also touching, the edges of that wound. So मतलब edges का मतलब है उसके किनारे किनारे पे वो टच कर रहे हैं और वो उसको दबाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, trying to press, कि किसी तरह से ये जो wound है, जैसे it happens. That means we have to understand over here that in the perspective of Klosner, that tree was equivalent to a human being. And therefore, whatever, procedures a person would try on a human being in case a human being gets hurt or meets with an accident like this, the same kind of a procedure or the treatment this Klosner was trying to give to the tree, by trying his best to press the wounds so that there was no bleeding or something like that. And he was also, continuously apologizing to the tree by saying, "Tree, oh tree, I'm really sorry." That means he could feel that pain, and he could feel that he did something wrong and that he had hurt the tree. And it was his imagination, not exactly imagination, but his strong belief, and you can say conviction, only because he had heard some sort of a sound at the very instant he struck the tree. So he could correlate and also arrive at the conclusion that the sound was actually this such a sound which was describing the pain of the tree when the tree was struck so badly. So What we can derive out of this entire paragraph, that Klosner was in this perspective that the tree was equivalent to a human being, and therefore it was as sensitive as a human being's body would be, and therefore it must have undergone intolerable pain by getting that weapon stuck into its body. For a while he stood there with his hands upon the trunk of the great tree. Then suddenly he turned away and hurried off out of the park, across the road, through the front gate, and back into his house. He went to the telephone, consulted the book, dialed a number, and waited. He held the receiver tightly in his left hand and tapped the table impatiently with his right. He heard the telephone buzzing at the other end, and then the click of a lifted receiver and a man's voice, a sleepy voice, saying, "Hello, yes, Dr. Scott," he said. "Yes, speaking, Dr. Scott. You must come at once, quickly, please." So for a while he was just standing there with his hands, upon the trunk of the great tree. All right. So he was just standing for some time over there, for quite a good amount of time, and with his hands completely on on the trunk of the tree, as if he was trying to console the tree, or was just trying to sympathize with the tree, and that he was very much apologetic, and the tree should feel better, about that. So then suddenly he thought something, and he turned back, and he just hurried away from that park and reached his house back. So reaching his house, he went to that telephone which was there, because he had got that landline. It was a time of all those kind of phones only. So he consulted that book. The book here refers to the directories that used to be there, and which contained a lot of phone numbers, almost of everyone, in the local area. So these days, so we have got the mobile facility, so we can save the numbers there. So he just took a directory, and from there he took out some number, and then he dialed the number, and he was waiting for the other person, on the other end, to respond to his call. So he held the receiver tightly in his left hand, and with his right hand he was tapping the table impatiently. So he had got the receiver in his left hand, and with the right hand he was tapping at the table, which was again reflecting something, or indicating that he was quite impatient about this that the person on the other end should respond to his call as soon as possible, just because he couldn't wait for long. So he heard the telephone buzzing at the other end, and then there was a click, and that clicking sound was an indication that the person had responded to the call, had picked up the receiver, and then he could hear the person from that end, that the person was saying in a very sleepy voice, "Hello, yes, what happened?" So he said, "Dr. Scott speaking." So Dr. Scott replied to him that, "Yes, speaking." So he said, "Dr. Scott, I want you to come here as soon as possible." At once means immediately, quickly, foreign. Who is it speaking? So Dr. Scott was so much drowsy at the moment that he couldn't even, identify the voice, and there used to be no, you can say, manifestation of the numbers on the phones, on those phones. So he couldn't make out the person on the other end, and therefore he asked, "Who is this speaking?" Klosner here, and you remember what I told you last night about my experience with sound and how I hoped I might. All right, so Klosner here, and also he said that, "Do you remember how I had told you about my experience with the sound, and how I was so much hopeful, to listen to all those sounds in the air that were in general not audible to the human ears?" So he just tried to remind the doctor of all those things, because he could even realize that the doctor was so much drowsy that he was not able to understand what exactly was going on, and why he was needed by Klosner, and that too in so much of hurry. So yes, yes, of course, but what's the matter? Are you ill? So obviously, being a doctor and being a friend, the very first question that he put forth was that, "Are you all right, or are you ill?" So he said, "No, I'm not ill, but I need you." So but after but there is a kind of a pause, but then we can conclude that he wanted to say this only, that, "I am in need of you, and you please reach here as soon as possible." "It's 6:30 in the morning," the doctor said, "and you call me, but you're not ill." So the doctor really, Obviously he got kind of pissed off about this, and he said, "Ki, it is getting 6 in the morning, it's early in the morning, and you are calling me right now. However, you are also saying at the same time that you're not feeling unwell. So what is such a big reason with you that you want to call me so early in the morning?" Obviously, it is not an easy task for anybody to leave that cozy and comfortable bed and then, go for a call. So please come quickly. I want someone to hear it. It's driving me mad. I can't believe it. So as I told you, that Klausner was actually getting, insane and crazy and whimsical. You can say humorous. मतलब वो एकदम पागल हो रहा है. Just to share, this story with somebody, and just to, show that this mechanism which he had tried to apply was turning out to be successful, and what he had experienced, he wanted other people as well to undergo that, and even at the same time help him to realize that it had actually come out to be a successful one, and whatever was happening, it was something true. So he, since he couldn't believe himself, and therefore he wanted others as well to get indulged into this, and therefore he tried to seek the help from the doctor. The doctor heard the frantic. Okay, frantic is like insane, crazy, almost hysterical. Hysterical is uncontrollable. Note means sound in the man's voice. So the doctor could sense something really crazy and something really uncontrollable in the voice of Klausner. And the same note he was used to hearing in the voices of people who called up and said there has been an accident. All right. So the doctor could correlate the voice of Klausner with the voice of those people who would often call the doctor and tell him about some accident in a very fearful, nervous, and anxious way. So the doctor could like correlate. And he said, "Oh, okay, come quickly," he said slowly. "You really want me to get out of bed and come over now?" So the doctor confirmed this again to Klausner, that, "Do you really want me to come right now itself? So early in the morning, leaving my cozy and comfortable bed behind?" So this was the question made by the doctor again to Klausner, so as to ensure whether he was actually required and he was really supposed to leave his bed at that time. "Yes, now at once, please." So Klausner replied to that yes, of course, I want you to come right now itself, and as soon as possible, just very quickly, immediately. And all right, then I will come. So the doctor replied to Klausner that he would surely go soon. Okay. Klausner sat down beside the telephone and waited. He tried to remember what the shriek of the tree had sounded like, but he couldn't. He could remember only that it had been enormous and frightful, and that it had made him feel sick with horror. He tried to imagine what sort of noise a human would make if he had to stand anchored to the ground while some one deliberately swung a small sharp thing at his leg so that the blade cut in deep and wedged itself in the cut. Some sort of noise, perhaps, no, quite different. So Kloster was sitting there beside the telephone, and he was anxiously waiting for his friend to come. And in the meantime, he was thinking about the screaming of the tree, and he was trying to correlate the sound with some other sound that he might have heard somewhere before. But then he arrived at the conclusion that the sound was actually such a sound that he hadn't ever heard before. So he could just remember that the sound was quite frightful, apprehensive, terrible, and it was like a large one. And it was such a disgusting sound that it had kind of made him feel sick. And then he imagined something, and which is very important, as I told you, that Klausner had become so much obsessed with the sound that he was trying to equate it with the human being. He was trying to realize that the sound which was made by the tree was as painful as the sound a human being would make if a human being had undergone such a hit or such an attack. So he tried to imagine what sort of a noise a human being would make. All right. So he just thought in this manner that in place of that tree, If there had been a human being standing and tied up to the ground, like the trees were rooted into the ground, like a tree is rooted into the ground. Now, in the same manner, he is imagining कि if a human being had been standing in place of the tree, and anchored means tied up to the ground in the same manner as a tree is rooted into the ground or the soil underneath. So अगर इंसान इस तरह से खड़ा होता और टाइड अप इसलिए किया, जैसे पेड़ जो है वो जड़ों से इतना ज़्यादा बंधे हुए हैं कि वो अपनी जगह से हिल नहीं सकते, भाग नहीं सकते, बिल्कुल वैसे ही अगर इंसान भी बंधा होता ज़मीन से और फिर हम उसे ऐसे ही मारते जैसे हमने पेड़ की ट्रंक पे मारा, वैसे ही अगर हम इंसान के पैर पर मारते और वो जो ब्लेड था वो उतना ही डीप कट करता और जाके इस तरह से स्टक हो जाता, किस तरह का कि वो आवाज़ होती जो इंसान कॉज करता, इंसान किस आवाज़ में चिल्लाता, वो आवाज़ कैसी होती, क्या वो आवाज़ ऐसी ही होती जैसी इस ट्री ने कॉज किया था? देन सो ही इज़ लाइक इन अ स्टेट ऑफ अ डिलेमा, and he's just trying to correlate and equate it with the sound that a human being would have caused. That means he is considering the tree equivalent to a human being, as I just told you. So then he is arriving at this conclusion, no no no, quite different, ये इंसान की आवाज़ तो बिल्कुल भी नहीं होती, इंसान की आवाज़ हमेशा इससे अलग होती, just because this sound had a different characteristic. It seemed to be a throatless one, and this is something really important about this sign, is about this sound, which you need to underline in its description, that the sound was quite you can say throatless one. And throatless one is just giving you this idea that it can never be, from the source of a human being. So he is thinking that the noise of the tree was worse than any known human noise because of that frightening underlying toneless, throatless quality. Okay, so a human being couldn't have ever made such a sound, couldn't have possibly made, it is not possible for a human being to make such a sound, which is so frightening, which has no tone, no emotion, and which seems to be coming from no throat as well. So he began to wonder. Wonder means think deeply or contemplate about other living things, and he thought immediately of a field of wheat. Then he imagined कि अगर कोई एक खेत हो जहाँ पर wheat है, गेहूँ है, और उस वहाँ पर बहुत सारे wheat के जो bushes हैं, they are there over there, and then he's imagining कि they must be, obviously they would look yellow in color and very much alive, but then with the mower going through it. So if we use a mower, which is obviously the device to cut them, then, and that device is able to cut 500 stems in just 1 second. So imagine that so many stems would be causing such a terrible sound in just 1 second. So per second, such a drastic sound, such a disastrous sound would be heard, and that too by so many stems all together at the same time. So, oh my god, what that noise be like? What would that noise be like? So while imagining, he was like getting frightened, even more frightened. 500 wheat plants screaming together, अगर 500 wheat plants एक साथ चिल्लाएंगे और हर सेकेंड दूसरे 500 wheat plants चिल्लाएंगे, this is how when mower keeps on going, and cutting them. So what would that sound be like? Or if I'm able to hear with the help of my machine, how would I feel? What would be my feeling? I would never eat bread after that. So he thought कि अगर उसने एक बार सुन लिया तो शायद उसके बाद तो वो कभी रोटी खा ही नहीं पाएगा. But then he thought about other, vegetation like potatoes and cabbages and carrots and onions. Inka kya? And what about apples? Then he thought, no, apples are all right, because they fall off naturally when they are ripe. Because in case of apples, we are not supposed to cut them down, but then they fall off naturally as they are ripe due to the gravitational force in the earth, So he thought about them in this manner. But then let us think about him also, that he should have been a bit more sensible to think that all right, even if the apples do not have to undergo any pain uh, being cut, just because they fall off naturally as they get ripe, but then eventually they are, you know, eaten by people. So when one would eat them, obviously they will get into pieces and they will be chewed and bitten, so this is how they will get hurt as well. But then he was just, you know, was not able to exactly understand, and therefore he was concluding in these ways. Then he was saying apples are all right, and then he said, okay, if you let them fall off instead of tearing them from the tree branch. Okay, so apples are all right as long as you allow them to fall off naturally instead of, you know, cutting them before they get ripe and fall down naturally. But it is not so in case of vegetables, because okay, not a potato, for example potato, in case of potatoes it is not possible, and therefore we must accept it as a matter of fact that the potatoes will surely scream being cut. So would a carrot, and the carrots would also do the same in case of onion, and in case of cabbage as well. You know, the same thing will happen, that they will scream and such a sound, or probably a sound slightly different from this one would be caused. He heard the click of the front gate latch, and which was telling him that the doctor had come, obviously. तभी गेट जो है वो उनको साउंड सुनाई दिया गेट के खोलने का. And he jumped up because of excitement, and he went out and he saw that his friend doctor, who was a tall one, he was coming with his little bag in his hand. So that little bag he always used to carry with himself as a doctor, with all the, you know, required equipments in that bag, so that whenever he needed them under any circumstances, he could easily use those equipments. Well, the doctor said, well, what's all the trouble? So the doctor said, what's the problem? Kya ho gaya? Come with me, doctor. I want to, I want you to hear it. I called you because you're the only one I have told. Okay. So he said, he said this to the doctor, that please come, and I have invited you. I want to share this with you, just because you are the only person with whom I had already shared about this idea of mine, and therefore I want to tell you something more as well. It's over the road in the park, and therefore you'll have to come along with me to that spot so that I can exactly show you what I want to. And will you come with me or not? The doctor looked at him. He seemed calmer now. So the doctor looked at him, and when the doctor looked at him, he looked kind of calm and pacified, just because he was happy to think that by that time the doctor had already arrived, and now he had a lot of, you know, probabilities to share his experience with the doctor and feel better consequently. There was no sign of madness or hysteria. He was merely disturbed in excitement. All right. At least for that point of time, there seemed to be no madness or insanity or, you know, hysteria in him, that he was getting uncontrollable or going senseless. But then he seemed to be merely means only a bit disturbed and excited. They went across the road into the park, and Klosner led the way to the great beech tree, at the foot of which stood the long black coffin box of the machine and the axe. All right. So they went across the road and they reached to the park and to the same spot, the same tree. And they, you know, Klosner led, means he guided him to that place where the tree was. एंड वहीं पर ट्री के पास जो है ज़मीन पे रखा हुआ है वो ब्लैक कॉफिन बॉक्स, विच इज़ एक्चुअली दैट मशीन, और एक्स भी रखा है. देन द डॉक्टर आस्क्ड, व्हाई डिड यू ब्रिंग इट आउट हियर? यहाँ क्यों लेकर आए हो ये सब? I wanted a tree. There aren't any big trees in the garden. So to that, Klosner replied that he needed a tree to conduct his experiment, but then there was no tree in the garden, and therefore he had to come all the way to the park. And why the axe? So the doctor, you know, put forth another question to him. Then why have you carried this axe along? You will see in a moment, but now please put on these earphones and listen. उसने कहा, all right, तुम्हें सब कुछ बताएंगे, but फिलहाल के लिए तुम earphones लगाओ और ध्यान से सुनने की कोशिश करो. Listen carefully and tell me afterwards precisely what you hear. पहले तुम बस ध्यान से चुपचाप सुनो जो सुना रहे हैं, उसके बाद precisely मतलब exactly बताना कि तुमने सुना क्या. I want to make quite sure, since I want to, make it very much sure to you that whatever you heard was absolutely right and was not at all an illusion or just your fantasy, but something real and something actually you could feel or hear. And therefore you should not be telling me later on ki you couldn't understand or you couldn't figure out, couldn't make out what happened to you. So I want you to remain, uh, at a surety, and therefore I want you to be very vigilant and alert with all your senses. So the doctor smiled and took the earphones and put them over his ears. So the doctor smiled and could understand that Klosner was very much obsessed by that time, and so he took the earphones as well and he put them over his ears. And then Klosner bent down and flicked the switch on the panel of the machine. Then he picked up the axe and took his stance. With his legs apart, ready to swing, for a moment he paused. "Can you hear anything?" he said to the doctor. "All right." So Klosner bent down and he flicked the switch on the panel. That means he just switched on, and then he picked up his axe as well. Then again he took his posture and got ready to hit the tree. And he was standing with his legs apart so that he could, do that hitting very properly. And he was ready to swing. Swing, you understand, swinging in this direction, in this action, you can say this action is called swinging. So he was just ready to swing. For a moment he paused. For some time he took a pause as well, and then he said, "Can you hear anything?" he said to the doctor. He asked the doctor whether the doctor could hear anything or not. "Can I what? Can you hear anything?" The doctor said, "Can I what?" That means he couldn't hear the last word said by Klosner. So to that Klosner replied, "Can you hear anything? कुछ सुनाई दे रहा है?" Just a humming noise. So the doctor replied कि एक humming sound जो है वो सुनाई दे रहा है. Klosner stood there with the axe in his hands, trying to bring himself to swing. So the Klosner, thy is never placed before name. Klosner was standing there, and he had got that axe in his hands, and he was just trying to uh, get himself completely ready to perform that thing to hit the tree. But the thought of the noise that the tree would make made him pause again. Okay, so there was something which was serving as an obstruction, you can say, and that was the noise which he had heard before. And due to that he was not able to strike at the tree in one go, and he was pausing again and again, just because he was getting reminded of that noise which he had heard before when he had struck the tree, and he was feeling really apprehensive about it, due to which he was not able to gather his strength and strike at the tree in one go. So what happened that okay, so what are you waiting for, the doctor asked. So the doctor asked, "What are you waiting for?" Since the doctor did not know that he was not able to convince himself to strike the tree at once, because of his fear of the noise that he had already heard. But the doctor was, getting excited as well, and he wanted to see what would happen ahead and what would follow. So the doctor said, "What happened? Why are you taking pause again and again?" "Nothing," Klosner answered, and then he lifted the axe and swung it at the tree. So Klosner answered that nothing, and then he lifted his axe and swung at the tree. And as he swung, he thought, he felt, he could swear he felt a movement of the ground on which he stood. Okay, so as he swung, he could feel something, and he could swear upon that feeling, just because he was so much alert all those moments, and he felt a kind of a movement of that ground on which he was standing, just because the roots inside must have shaken or something like that. He felt a slight shifting of the earth beneath his feet, as though the roots of the tree were moving underneath the soil. So he could feel something like earthquake, just because it seemed to him as if the roots, of the tree underneath were kind of moving or shifting or shuffling. But it was too late to check the blow. But then by that time he couldn't, like he had, he was all set to do that. And like it happens, Naki, you are going in a lot of speed, um, अपने vehicle में, or suddenly you find some other vehicle coming from the opposite direction, and you can sense also that it might strike you or it might collide with your vehicle. But then by that time it is too late for you to be able to control your vehicle or yourself or anything, and then you realize that the situation is going out of control and you cannot do anything about it, and you have to just face it helplessly. In the same manner, by the time Klausner realized that he shouldn't be doing this, just because there was such a huge, you know, change that he could feel even in the earth due to the movement of the roots of the tree. But then he couldn't help himself control anything, since by that time it had already got too late. So what happened that he couldn't check the blow. Check means stop or seize the blow, the hit, and the axe blade struck the tree and wedged deep into the wood. So what happened consequently कि वो उन्होंने strike किया और फिर बहुत गहरी चोट लग गई. At that moment, high overhead, there was the cracking sound of wood splintering and swishing sound of leaves brushing against other leaves, and they both looked up, and the doctor cried, "Watch out, run man, quickly run." Okay, so बहुत तेज़ लगी थी और उसमें डीप वुंड हो गया था, और उसी मोमेंट पे उन्होंने ऊपर से जैसे कोई क्रैकिंग साउंड सुनाई दिया उनको, वुड के स्प्लिंटरिंग का, जैसे कि लकड़ी टूट रही हो, और एक जैसे पत्ते आपस में टकरा रहे हो, दूसरी लीव्स, एक लीव जो है वो दूसरी लीव से टकरा रही हो, ब्रश कर रही हो, और उसकी वजह से भी एक स्विशिंग साउंड क्रिएट हो रहा हो, और फिर दोनों ने एक दूसरे को देखा और डॉक्टर ने कहा, just run away from here, because the tree could fall down upon them itself, and obviously as a consequence of that they would die, or they could hurt themselves very badly, so depending upon the size of the tree and all. The doctor had ripped off the earphones and was running away fast, but Klausner stood spellbound, staring up at the great branch, 60 feet long at least, that was bending slowly downward, breaking and crackling and splintering at its thickest point. Where it joined the main trunk of the tree, the branch came crashing down, and Klausner leapt aside. Just in time, it fell upon the machine and smashed it into pieces. So what happened that the doctor had taken off his earphones, just threw it away, and then he ran away from there very fast. And but Klausner, was so much obsessed that he still was standing there, and spellbound means as if under some sort of a charm, that he was not able to move from there. And he was still staring at that great branch of the tree, which was around 60 feet long, probably at least, and that was bending slowly downward and breaking as well. It was slowly and gradually breaking and crackling and splintering. All such sounds could be heard, just because it was breaking from its thickest point as well, and which was giving a very clear indication that it would surely fall down. Where it joined the main trunk of the tree, that means the tree had started breaking even from the main joint, even from the main part, you can say, and therefore it was sure to fall down very badly, and the branch came crashing down. Obviously it had to. And Klausner leapt aside. Leapt is jumped aside, so he just jumped very quickly and got aside just in time. That means he was precisely in time to save himself, else he would have been victimized by the falling of that tree. So, but unfortunately, what happened? That the machine couldn't be saved by him. It was lying there, and the tree fell down on the machine itself, and obviously, as a result, as a repercussion, as a consequence, the machine got smashed, got broken into pieces. Great heavens, shouted the doctor as he came running back. And the doctor, said, "Great heavens, oh my god." And he came running back, and that was a near one. I thought it had got you. So the doctor was more concerned about Klausner, not about the machine, and he said that, "I thought that you would surely get victimized by the falling of the tree, as you were so near to it. But then That's good that fortunately just in time you could save yourself by getting away from there. So Klausner was staring at the tree, but Klausner was lost in some other thought. He was still in the thought of the machine and was lost in it. Ki, what has happened and how the tree fell down and how he had badly hurt the tree, since he was the only one who could feel that shifting of the roots and the pain of the tree and the sound and everything. So he had felt all of that so much, so deeply that it was actually affecting him. So it happened that he was still, staring or gazing at the tree, and his large head was leaning to one side. उनका वैसे भी हेड जो है एक साइड पे इंक्लाइंड रहता है, झुका रहता है, ऐसा लगता है जैसे उनकी नेक में ताकत ही ना हो उनके हेड को स्ट्रॉन्ग रखने की. So upon his smooth white face there was a tense, horrified expression. So we know that his face was a kind of a smooth and white one, and there seemed to be, I told you, countenance. Countenance means facial expression. So the kind of expression on his face we could see was tension and terror as well, apprehension. He was fearful. Slowly he walked up to the tree and gently he prized the blade loose from the trunk. So he walked up to the tree and he tried to take out the blade from there. And did you hear it? He said, turning to the doctor. Then he turned to the doctor and asked this very, very important question to the doctor, whether the doctor had heard that noise or not. His voice was barely audible, right? So when he talked to the doctor and asked this question, he said it in such a whispering way or such a soft way that his voice itself was not properly audible, was hardly audible. And the doctor was still out of breath from the running and excitement, but the doctor was lost in some other activity, and he was still thinking and feeling rather happy about his narrow escapement from death or from a very bad accident. So he was still breathless, panting from running and due to the excitement, and he's saying, "Kya sunna tha? Kya suna?" In the earphones, did you hear anything when the axe struck? क्या तुमने earphones में कुछ सुना जब वो हमने strike किया था axe से पेड़ को? तो the doctor began to rub the back of his neck. So he began to rub the back of his neck, right, like this, and which was like an indication that he had completely forgotten that part, in the entire story while running and getting excited for something else or for trying to escape from that accident or something. So, well, he said, as a matter of fact, बस इतना बोल के, and then there are dots which is showing that there was a kind of a pause. He paused and frowned. Frowned मतलब forehead पे शिकन आ जाना when we do something like this, and bit his lower lip, और वो अपने lower lip को bite करने लगे. Now all this, together, this entire gesture is a manifestation or reflection, or you can say showing that he was feeling kind of guilty or realizing his mistake, that he was supposed to do something but he forgot to do that altogether because of other activities that began to happen at the same time. No, I'm not sure, he's saying. I couldn't be sure. I don't suppose I had the earphones on for more than more than a second after the access struck. Okay, so since, as we remember now, that he had tried to run away, and while trying to run away from there, he had also thrown the earphones. So he was more concerned about his life and about his safety, and therefore he's saying, "Yeah, I don't know whether I heard anything or not, because I don't even remember if the earphones were still, in my ears for more than, over my ears for more than a second. I think in just a second it happened that I removed them." Yes, but what did you hear? All right, but did you hear anything at all? I don't know, the doctor said. I don't know what I heard. Probably the noise of the branch breaking. He was speaking rapidly, rather irritably. So the doctor said that I don't exactly remember what I heard, and probably what I heard was the noise of the branch breaking, and that is the noise which is easily audible to any human being, so it was not something special or something extraordinary. And then he was answering in a very, rapid way. Rapidly is like very quickly he was speaking, and also he was speaking irritably in a very peevish manner. So it was rather more irritating than for Klausner to hear all that, that his attempt had failed. At least his attempt to show any other person as well besides himself that this machine had turned out to be this much successful, and he could hear such extraordinary sounds with the help of this machine. He could at least show to someone else as well. But then he realized that the machine had already broken into pieces, and that nobody else besides himself could see that the machine was this much successful, or the machine could help to hear such extraordinary sounds. So this is how, Klausner felt very disheartened and felt as if he had lost the game, and completely, entirely. And this made him go actually mad. So what did it sound like? Klausner leaned forward slightly, staring hard at the doctor. Exactly what did it sound like? Okay. So Klausner leaned forward slightly. That means वो सामने की तरफ थोड़ा सा और झुके और करीब गए उनके. और क्लॉसनर ने पूछा, बताओ वो साउंड कैसा था? Whatever you got to hear, whatever sound, but you have to describe that sound to me. And he was staring hard at the doctor, gazing very hard at the doctor. And he was saying, just try to correlate that sound with something and tell me exactly. Oh hell, the doctor said. I really don't know. The doctor said, oh my god, what the hell is this? Why are you like after me? I have not heard that sound. I was more interested in just, escaping that accident, in running away from that spot so that I could save myself. I was more concerned about safety at that time. Let's leave it. And how does it matter? Dr. Scott, what did it sound like? So he's saying like this, Dr. Scott, what did it sound like? Tell me. That's what matters the most for me. That's what you meant to convey. For God's sake, how could I tell with with half the tree falling on me and having to run for my life? He's saying, what are you expecting me to tell you? At that point of time, I was just lost in the thought and the prominent thought of saving myself and running away from there. And in that process, I couldn't remember to do what you had asked me to. So I don't remember anything. I was, simply running away from there. I was more concerned about my life, and therefore I couldn't pay heed or attention to the sound. The doctor certainly seemed nervous. Certainly, surely. So the doctor surely looked nervous, and Klausner had sensed it. Klausner could feel कि अब ये जो डॉक्टर है, जैसे ना डॉक्टर नर्वस इसलिए हो रहा है क्योंकि डॉक्टर को नज़र आ रहा है कि क्लॉसनर इस वक्त अपने सेंसेस में नहीं है और ये अपने किसी हिस्टैरिकल मोड में चला गया है, एकदम पागल सा हो गया है. और जाहिर है किसी के कोई भी इंसान जब पागलों की तरह थोड़ा बिहेव करने लगे तो उसके साथ वाला इंसान उसके पागलपन से डर जाएगा. सो व्हाट हैपेंड दैट ही स्टूड क्वाइट स्टिल, चुपचाप खड़ा हो गया, स्टेयरिंग एट द डॉक्टर, डॉक्टर की तरफ देखने लगा. एंड फॉर फुली हाफ अ मिनट ही डिडंट स्पीक. आधे मिनट के लिए चुप था. द डॉक्टर मूव्ड हिज फीट. अच्छा, तो डॉक्टर ने अपने पैर हिलाए, shrugged his shoulders, थोड़ा सा shoulders shrug किया, and half turned to go, and he just half turned to go from there. Well, he said, we would better get back. He said, रुक जाओ, अभी रुक जाओ. Look, said the little man. Little man is Klausner. उसने कहा देखो. And now his smooth white face became suddenly suffused with color. Okay, so अब क्या हुआ कि उसका ऐसा लगा जैसे कि उसके वाइट फेस पे कुछ कलर मिक्स होने लगे. और उसने कहा रुको. Look, he said, you stitch this up. We cannot leave this wound like that, this gash like that. You'll have to stitch it up. तुम्हें इसको हील करना होगा. इसे प्रॉपर तरीके से स्टिच करना होगा, इस चोट को, वुंड्स को स्टिच करना होगा। ही पॉइंटेड टू द लास्ट गैश, जो लास्ट उसको बाद में जो वुंड, उसको जो चोट लगी है उस चोट की तरफ, ओपन वुंड को गैश कहते हैं, उसकी तरफ इशारा करके उसने कहा that the axe had made in the tree trunk. वो उस एक्स की वजह से जो ट्री ट्रंक में जो चोट आई है उसको उसने कहा। यू स्टिच दिस अप क्विकली, जस्ट बिकॉज ही इज अ डॉक्टर ना, तो क्लॉसनर इज सीकिंग हिज हेल्प इन दैट एंड सेइंग कि तुम इसे फौरन स्टिच करो। डोंट बी सिली, द डॉक्टर सेड। डॉक्टर ने कहा पागल हो गए हो, आप पेड़ को बैठ के हमसे लेंगे। यू डू एज आई से, उसने कहा जैसा कह रहे हैं वैसा करो। स्टिच इट अप। क्लॉसनर वॉज ग्रिपिंग द एक्स हैंडल एंड ही स्पोक सॉफ्टली। क्लॉसनर के हाथ में एक्स है, उसका हैंडल है, और वो बहुत सॉफ्टली कह रहा है और बहुत ही क्यूरियस, जैसे इंक्विजिटिव, जैसे वो बस बहुत एंशियस है और उस टोन में कह रहा है, लेकिन एट द सेम टाइम उसकी टोन में एक धमकी भी नज़र आ रही है, ऐसा लग रहा है धमकी दे रहा है। इट्स अ थ्रेटनिंग टोन कि बस करो वरना फिर उसके रिजल्ट के, अंजाम के जिम्मेदार तुम खुद होगे। So don't be silly, the doctor said. डॉक्टर ने कहा प्लीज don't go mad. I can't stitch through wood. और वैसे भी लकड़ियों में कैसे सिएंगे, लकड़ियों में कैसे स्टिचिंग करेंगे, कैसे टाके लगाएंगे। Come on, let's get back. चलते हैं यहाँ से वापस। So you can't stitch through wood. अच्छा, तो तुम लकड़ियों में टाके नहीं लगा सकते? No, of course not. डॉक्टर ने कहा नहीं, बिल्कुल भी नहीं। Have you got any iodine in your bag? क्या तुम्हारे पास कोई आयोडीन है बैग में? What if I have? अच्छा चलो मान लिया है बैग में। So what? Then paint the cut with iodine. तो तुम अपनी आयोडीन निकालो और उसको जो है इस कट पे लगाओ। I will sting but that can't be helped. उसने कहा ठीक है, I'll do that. But उससे क्या होगा? Now look, the doctor said. And again he turned as if to go. उसने कहा देखो अब, और फिर वो जैसे लगा कि अब वो जाना चाहता है यहाँ से, and he turned also with the same intention. And said, let's not be ridiculous. Ridiculous is like funny. Please don't be funny. Don't talk like this. जिसको सुन के हंसी आ रही है, as if you're mad or getting mad. Let's get back to the house and then we will discuss this, what happened and how and what. So he's saying, paint the cut with iodine. Again instructing the same thing with this, accentuating each and every word, emphasizing upon each and every word so as to ensure that, see how serious he is about this, that you have to do so. So he instructed the doctor to do that, and that too on a very serious note. And the doctor was actually, finding himself trapped into that. So the doctor hesitated. अब डॉक्टर ने थोड़ा हेजिटेट किया. He saw Klausner's hands tightening on the handle of the axe. उसने ये भी देखा कि अब क्लॉसनर के हाथ एक्स के हैंडल पे टाइट हो रहे हैं, and which might turn out to be dangerous or fatal for the doctor. So he decided, no, it's better, to follow the instruction. He decided that his only alternative was to run away fast, and he certainly wasn't going to do that. The only option that the doctor had was to run away from there as fast as he could. But then that the doctor decided not to choose as an alternative or as an option, and therefore another option that was left to him was just to do as Klausner was asking him to. So, all right, he said, I will paint it with iodine. He said, all right, then I'm gonna do so. He got his black bag, which was lying on the grass about 10 yards away. He opened it and took out a bottle of iodine and some cotton wool. So he just went to there. He got his black bag, and which was lying on the grass. It was there, kept on the grass from there, and it was about 10 yards away from there. So he reached to that bag, and then he took out that bottle of iodine and some cotton wool as well, with the help of which he could apply that iodine right on the wood. So he went up to the tree trunk, then uncorked the bottle. Uncorked is like opened its lid, tipped some of the iodine onto the cotton wool. That means थोड़ा सा टिप करके कॉटन वूल पे निकाला आयोडीन को, और उसके बाद फिर छुप करके उसको डैप करने लगा, ऐसे ऐसे करके लगाने लगा किस पे, कट पे. उसकी एक नज़र जो है, मतलब एक आई उसने कंटिन्यूसली क्लॉसनर पे रखी है He kept one eye on Klausner, मतलब नजर रखी है, who was standing motionless, that means without moving at all, with the axe in his hands watching him. So he was continuously watching the doctor, whether the doctor was, performing all that religiously or not. And therefore the doctor was also vigilant about the action of Klausner and was keeping his one eye completely upon him, as Klausner had got something really dangerous, and that was the axe in his hand. And that's why the doctor was so much conscious. Make sure you get it right in. Sahi se karna ekdam. Yes, the doctor said. The doctor is saying, yes, of course, I'll do that. Now do the other one. The one just above it, the doctor did as he was told. Then it was the last one, that means उससे पहले, उसके बाद फिर क्या हुआ, उन्होंने कहा कि दूसरा वाला जो वुंड है जो ऊपर लगा हुआ है उसको भी पट्टी करो, उसको भी टाके लगाओ, सॉरी उसको भी आयोडीन लगाओ, उसको वहाँ पर भी. So the doctor was just doing, as per the commands. The doctor did as he was told. There you are, he said, it's done. Okay, now it's done. He straightened up and surveyed his work in a very serious manner. That should do nicely. So the doctor, he straightened up himself and just, looked at whatever he had done. He had dabbed iodine onto the wounds. So he was checking it very seriously, as seriously as he would have done on a human being. The doctor was doing like this, so as to show this to Klausner that he was actually doing it on a serious note, and that Klausner shouldn't harm him in any way. So this is how the doctor did all of that and said, yeah, I think it should be, helping the tree overcome this. Klausner came closer and gravely, means seriously, examined the two wounds. And so Klausner reached up to the tree, went nearer, and also examined that actually, it had been going well or not, and things had been done properly or not. So yes, he said, nodding his huge head slowly up and down. तो धीरे धीरे से सर हिलाते हुए उन्होंने कहा, हाँ लग रहा है कि तुमने ठीक ठाक काम किया है. Yes, that will do nicely. He stepped back a pace. A pace is a step. एक step पीछे आए. You'll come and look at them again tomorrow. And then he said to the doctor, कल तुम फिर आओगे और आकर के चेक करोगे इन wounds को. Oh yes, the doctor said, of course. And the doctor is saying, yes, of course. As if the doctor was like, was trapped, was bound, tied up, and he was simply answering as per the commands of Klausner then. Since the doctor was concerned about his life, and he was saying, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And put some more iodine on. और तुम आकर के एक बार फिर से iodine लगाओगे. If necessary, yes. The doctor said, yes, I'll come and see first. And if it is necessary to dab some more iodine onto the wounds, then I'll surely do that as well. Thank you, doctor, Klausner said. And he nodded his head again, and he dropped the axe, and all at once he smiled. So Klausner said, thank you, doctor. And then he nodded his head again. फिर से अपना सर हिलाया और फिर उस एक्स को छोड़ दिया ज़मीन में जो उसके हाथ में थी, और अचानक से at once, all of a sudden, he smiled. और ये जो स्माइल थी उसकी अंडरलाइन दिस अ वाइल्ड एक्साइटेड स्माइल. उसके चेहरे पे एक अजीब सी वाइल्ड सी एक्साइटेड वाली स्माइल है, एक्साइटिंग स्माइल. एंड क्विकली द डॉक्टर वेंट ओवर टू हिम, और डॉक्टर उसके पास पहुंचा एंड जेंटली ही टुक हिम बाय द आर्म एंड ही सेड, पकड़ा उनके हाथ को और कहा, कम ऑन, वी मस्ट गो नाउ, अब हमें चलना चाहिए. सडनली दे वर वॉकिंग अवे, और फिर वो लोग वहाँ से वापस जाने लगे. द टू ऑफ देम, बोथ द डॉक्टर एंड क्लॉसनर, वॉकिंग साइलेंटली, बहुत चुपचाप से वो लोग जा रहे हैं. दे आर नॉट स्पीकिंग टू ईच अदर, rather hurriedly across the park, as if they were very much in a hurry. They were moving across the park, over the road, and then back to the house. So this is how they reached the house back, and what happened ahead is not here in the story, but then we can realize what the doctor must have undergone, and the situation that the doctor had been into, and the kind of a feeling the doctor must have felt when he was obliged and compelled to do as per the instructions of Klausner. And Klosmer had actually gone mad. He seemed to be hysterical. He seemed to be uncontrollable, going senseless, insane, whimsical, humorous, or you can say crazy. Just because he had got so much obsessed with that idea of listening to all sorts of ultrasonic and ultrasounds and infrasounds. And he was also obsessed with that machine that he thought he would be able to make to enable himself and other human beings to hear all such extraordinary sounds. And he wanted to you know uh, he wanted to be successful in preparing such a machine. And we had seen how he was carrying that machine, holding with both the hands close to his chest, which was showing that he was very much possessive and obsessed with that. So when that machine got smashed into pieces, and also he found that nobody in the world besides him could come to know of his experiment and his success to whatever extent it was, then he kind of went mad, more mad. It maddened him even more. And then he was like, behaving very crazily, ridiculously, as we saw that he was asking the doctor to paint the wound of the tree with iodine, and even to make sure that the wound gets healed properly by making a visit another day as well, and then keep checking it, and then keep dabbing iodine as per the requirement. So all these words of Klosner are reflecting his madness only. His frantic behavior is a manifestation of his obsession. This is a statement that you can write in your answer, that the frantic demeanor or the frantic gesture or the frantic behavior of Klosner was a clear manifestation of his obsession, right? So this is an important line, and I hope you understood this story line by line explanation too. And thank you so much for watching.